reading today from Rays of the One Light. These are commentaries comparing the Bible and Bhagavad Gita written by Swami Kriyananda and based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. An endlessly fascinating question is, why did Judas fall after receiving the extraordinary blessing of being accepted into the inner circle of Jesus Christ's disciples? For Judas was one of the 12 apostles, yet he betrayed Jesus and earned for himself the opprobrium of Christendom for all futurity for his sin. We find Judas reprimanding Jesus just days before that betrayal. Jesus, aware that his disciples would soon be facing with his death the supreme tragedy of their lives, allowed Mary to express her devotion by anointing his feet with costly ointment. This act of, quote, wanton waste, unquote, as Judas saw it, awakened indignation in that disciple. Why was this ointment not sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This, he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and kept the purse and bore what was put therein. Then said Jesus, let her alone. Against the day of my burying has she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Doubt not the power of delusion. Respect it, indeed fear it, though not in the sense of cowering before it. For as Yogananda said, one is not safe until he attains nirvikalpa samadhi, the state of final union with God. Judas, through attachment to money, opened his consciousness to subtle influences, which may be called satanic, that drew his thoughts toward other related attitudes, the importance of worldly power, for instance, and of worldly influence. The Bhagavad Gita gives a graphic explanation of how easily the mind can be drawn downward once it begins to feed on wrong attitudes. In the 2nd chapter, Sri Krishna states, if one ponders on sense objects, there springs up attraction to them. From attraction grows desire. Desire, impatient for fulfillment, flames to anger. From anger there arises infatuation, the desire that one object alone is worth clinging to the exclusion of all others. From that infatuation ensues forgetfulness of the higher self. From forgetfulness of the self follows degeneration of the discriminative faculty. And when discrimination is lost, there follows the annihilation of one's spiritual life. At the first thought of delusion, Paramhansa Yogananda said, that is the time to stop it. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Poor Judas. I can only imagine the anguish, the guilt, the pain that he must have felt. And Yogananda said that many centuries later, I think it was in the late 1800s, Judas was finally freed, finally liberated. And Yogananda went on to say that in that lifetime, Judas lived in an ashram with a guru, and his some of his fellow disciples would tease him about his attachment to money. And his guru went to those disciples and said, no, don't do that. Too painful, much too painful. But he was finally liberated. And this morning as I was meditating, I remembered that the tradition is that Ravana, the great demon king who was the enemy of Lord Rama and Lord Rama's wife Sita, Ravana stole Sita away, and it's a big drama, big epic story in India. But anyway, this demon king, Ravana, the story goes, the tradition goes, that he was actually a great devotee of Lord Rama. And Rama went to Ravana in a past life and said, you can either be born 6 lifetimes as my devotee, or you can be born 1 lifetime as my enemy. And Ravana loved Rama so much that he couldn't wait 6 lifetimes. He decided to be the enemy for 1. And then he was finally liberated. There's so much more going on in this world than we can possibly imagine. But I think all of us have felt at one time or another that feeling of failure. Oh my gosh, I said such a stupid thing, or I did such a big mistake, or I am not putting out enough energy, or I'm not, whatever. There's a long list of ways that we can feel like we haven't done enough, or we haven't done it right, or we're just not good enough. And when we were talking about this introspection and the reading, we're not safe until we achieve nirvikalpa samadhi, it reminded me that on the higher planes of existence, like where Sri Yukteswar is, the autobiography of a yogi tells us he's in Haranyaloka, a plane of consciousness in which you have to have been liberated through nirvikalpa samadhi in order to even get in the door. Even there, devotees, as the autobiography of a yogi says, devotees experience pain if they even have a wrong thought. So that feeling of striving for perfection is part of this game. It's part of what we're doing, striving for perfection. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. And I don't know about you, but I often feel like I have a long way to go. But we have to remember, it's good to feel remorse. You know, I was talking to Swami Kriyananda one day, and he mentioned that sometimes a deformity will happen in the body because of a wrong action. So he was saying someone's foot was deformed, and in a past life they had kicked their mother. And I was horrified. I just said, well, what can we do to mitigate that? How do we change that horrible karma, doing something wrong and having it manifest as a deformity? And he looked at me like, well, don't you know the answer? And he said, we have to be sorry. We have to feel remorse. And that seemed like we were getting off pretty easy. But that is what we need to do. We need to own it and say, I did this and I am so sorry. Please forgive me. And that remorse is the first step towards healing any of that, any of the mistakes that we've made. Swami also would often say, God made us, God made the pitfalls, and He's not surprised when we fall into them. It's part of growing and changing. We all make mistakes. We all do things. We go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. We all do those things. And the important part is to own it, to feel remorse, to say, what can I do better? And then to leave it. Forget about it. You've learned the lesson. You're not going to do it again. Well, maybe you do it again. It's all a spiral, isn't it? We all get subtler and subtler tests, but all on the same things. But maybe this time you catch yourself. Maybe this time you go, okay, I am on to you. I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to fall in that pitfall. I see where it is, and I'm not going to go there. The first thought of delusion is the time to stop it, Yogananda says. And then bit by bit, we get better. But it's important to leave those mistakes, to just, as my husband used to say, throw them on the compost pile. Let them make beautiful flowers later. And that's the way to live in this world. To catch yourself, oh, that was wrong. Please forgive me. I am so sorry I made that mistake. And then let it go. Wallowing in the mistakes is the worst thing we can do. Never call yourself a sinner, Yogananda said. You are a child of God. And live in that light. One of the ways that we can avoid those mistakes is, remember the first part of this passage of the Bhagavad Gita, where it talks about brooding on sense objects causes attachment to them. Brooding. We don't want to brood. We don't want to think about, I really need to bolster my bank account and get all attached and driven to this motive. We need to let God take care of it. We need to do our best. It's one of the wonderful dichotomies of the spiritual path. We need to do our part 100%, but we need to trust God. Remember, Yogananda said our part, our 100%, is 25% of the whole. The Guru does the other 25%, and 50% is the grace of God. We have to put ourselves in the consciousness to attract that grace, because that's what will free us. God's grace. So don't live in the past, don't live in the consciousness of your mistakes, but live centered in the self. When we are truly centered and remembering God, guess what? We don't make as many mistakes. We don't fall prey to those delusions that are clawing at us from every telephone screen and every billboard and every television and every worldly person we encounter. We don't fall prey to it as easily because we are in a different consciousness. As Yogananda said, we can carry a portable paradise with us wherever we go. And that's what we need to live in. that portable paradise, which is being centered in the self, being calm, thinking of God, instead of brooding on sense objects, which we could see is just a downward spiral into prison. Instead, fill the mind with God. God remembrance. That beautiful whispers was so perfect for today, because that's how we need to see the world, as beautiful, as filled with God's light. Every person is an instrument for that light if they just knew it. That was one of the charming, magnetic aspects of Swami Kriyananda, that he would see the beauty and the sainthood in every person, that potential, and he would try to draw that out. You may have read Devi's blog, but she was talking this time about having a high school teacher who was so amazing, because she, at the end of the school year, gave each person in the class an individualized reading list, just for what she felt they needed. And Devi was so thrilled, and so were her friends. You know, they were trying to figure out what message was in each book for them. And on a grand scale, that's what God is doing. He's giving us the karma that's perfect for each one of us. What do we need to do with that karma that's got that hidden blessing, that hidden message for us? Never think that things that happen to us are just random or in vain or just without a message. Everything happens for a reason, even if it's just to tell us, trust me, trust in God. This has happened. Do you still love me? Or have you given up on me? Everything is for our higher good. And so let's remember this. Remember even just the first line, brooding on sense objects brings attachment to them. And whenever we get angry, remember this passage also. We get frustrated that our desires aren't being fulfilled, and so we get angry. Period. That's the reason. So every time you get angry, think back, okay, what desire has been thwarted here? What desire do I need to let go of? And give it to God. It never ceases to amaze me that this little mind would think that it can figure things out on its own. This old brain, why would I think that? If I can open up to the resources that are at God's disposal, wouldn't that be a better way of figuring out problems? And Lahiri Mahashaya said, solve all your problems through Kriya Yoga. And if we can do that, we can make great strides ahead in this lifetime. Strides ahead in freedom and in joy and in divine bliss.
Nirmala giving us the example of learning from mistakes that we make and owning them and being remorseful reminded me of a cute example that Swamiji told about himself. which is many, many years ago, he was playing volleyball with some of the other monks, his fellow monks, when he was at Mount Washington. And he was not the best player on the court, shall we say. And following the principle that Nirmala outlined before, someone would hit the ball and he would try to get it and it would go pinging off in some direction and they would lose the point and he would say, "Oh, my fault." And, this happened a whole bunch of times. And one of the other players on his team, his pet name that Master called him was Walter. And he said, "Walter, your remorse, your humility is inspiring, but when will you reform?" And that actually sort of gets to the heart of this topic. Why do devotees fall is the topic. And I could give you several reasons, as you see me wearing a neck brace. And I used to answer this question because, of course, we've given Sunday service many times over the years, and this topic comes up once every year. I used to sort of glibly answer this question because they're not looking where they're going. However, I can give a few other alternatives, one of which is they get the ladder that they're standing on knocked out from under them. But actually, on a more serious level, if we think about why something happens, one of the reasons why something bad happens, quote, bad, or a mistake happens, or a fall happens, is that the devotee doesn't necessarily understand the implications of what's about to happen, or the choice that they're about to make. And that is a theme that can play through our whole lives. And the other day, I was giving an example, and I'll share the same example because it applies here. You have a little child who wants to drive the car. They're 5 years old. "Mommy, I want to drive the car." Okay, well, maybe she plops little Johnny up on her lap and he holds the steering wheel and gets the feeling of, moving the car 3 inches one way and 3 inches the other way as they're driving down the road. But meanwhile, she's got her hands nearby and she's going to take hold of the steering wheel. And of course, his feet aren't long enough to reach the pedals, so the car's not going anywhere that she doesn't want it to go. Because little Johnny is not old enough to understand or to have the synapses, the development to understand where is the car going or what could happen. And that simple thing, so, going back to the 2 large falls that I've had in this incarnation, one of which happened because I put my foot on the icy side of the roof. I've actually put both feet. One foot would have been okay, because if it had slid out from under me, I just would have landed on the peak of the roof and been sitting there going, "Oh, maybe that's not such a good idea." But I got the other foot on that side of the roof, and then I went sliding down and shooting off the roof. And that led to a sprained ankle and crutches, as some of us know what crutches are all about. Well, okay, so I learned, don't stand on the icy side of the roof. Okay, fair enough. But to be able to look ahead, and this is a gift that Swamiji had, he could sort of connect seemingly very few dots, seemingly very few little breadcrumbs, but he could extrapolate from that toward, where is this going? What's going to happen when we get there? Is what's going to happen going to be good or not so good? Because as Nirmala pointed out, we're all going to fall down at one point or another, but we don't want to fall off a cliff. It's one thing. I was reflecting on this. Every little kid, every little infant who has ever tried to walk, which I suppose applies to all of us, if you're going to try to walk as an infant, you will fall down. It's like part of the territory. Because the first time you stand up, you're not going to have all the pieces, you're not going to have the balance yet. You won't have the muscular and the, everything. It all has to work together. So, yes, we will fall down. We have to get back up again. That's part of the job. I remember as a kid of maybe 5 or 6 years old, I had been moaning and groaning about wanting a bicycle. And, I had in my mind what this bicycle was going to look like, because some of my friends had these kind of banana bicycles. I don't know if that's the right term, but, the kind with handlebars up here, and you could, go down the street. I would watch these guys, the more talented among them, go down the street on the back tire, with the front one up in the air, pop a wheelie, except they continue popping the same wheelie all the way down the street. That's the kind of bike I was visualizing. Well, what I got, my parents being frugal, I got a full-sized bicycle. Now, it was a good bike. It was a Schwinn, and it was a very odd Schwinn. It was a 2-speed Schwinn. 1 speeds were there, 3 speeds were there, 5 speeds, 10 speeds, later on 18 and 21 and whatever. Well, mine was a 2-speed, and it was odd in that you moved the pedals a little bit backwards to shift gears, low gear, high gear, whatever. It also was the old style, if you remember this, where you move the pedal back to put the brake on. Well, I wasn't big enough to very easily put the brake on. I mean, I could get my feet to the pedals if I was not sitting on the seat. If I was sitting on the seat, I couldn't sort of push back. I had to kind of get, which, riding above the bar of the bike made it awkward to slow down, and I couldn't get my feet didn't reach the ground. So what did this mean? When I wanted to stop and get off the bike, I essentially had to crash the bike. I had to just tip over. Well, now, as you might imagine, the first few times that I did this, it was not a real pretty picture. You get a skin knee, or it wasn't super happy. I loved the bike, by the way. I was thrilled with the bike. I wasn't necessarily thrilled with the size of the bike, but I had that bike until I was in high school. And I used to ride it to high school, and it finally got stolen. Somebody cut the lock off of it and took it away, and that was the end of the Schwinn bicycle. But I mean, I had that bike a long, long time. I loved that bike. It was a great bike. But I learned, you can tip over in the grass, and it works out better. It's a softer landing. I learned how to do it a little more gracefully. It's like you learn. Some years ago, we had Andre, who's now Gopal from Ananda Village, come here and teach a sort of a Tai Chi class, a martial arts training, but it was designed to help us learn balance and particularly to learn how not to fall, or if you're gonna fall, how to land. Because how you land has a big effect on how you get up or don't get up, etc. And it was a wonderful class because he created his own martial arts system based on Master's energization exercises. I mean, he's a marvelous teacher. But I loved how that training isn't just about the body. Yes, it is helpful. It's extremely helpful for the body, because as I can personally attest, when you fall hard and you break a bunch of bones, yes, I broke a bunch of bones, it's not real fun. It sort of puts you on a slight, I don't know, you kind of get in the slow lane, let's just say, on the highway of life. You're not in the passing lane. I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say it's a detour, but I will say it does slow you down a little bit. Okay, but we learn. And this is the beauty of Swamiji pairing introspection with this reading. Because introspection is not only what we do after disaster, it's also what we do before and in order to prevent the next one from happening. We learn, we prepare, we see ahead, like Nirmala was saying. We're watching and we say, ha, 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 the pit is not going to get me this time because I see it. I've been through that. I'm going to go around it. I'm going to go a different way. I'll jump over it, whatever it may be. I loved how in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Battle of Kurukshetra in general, but specifically the Bhagavad Gita, Master gives us all these characters and he describes the meaning that they all have, the spiritual meaning. And so he's talking about the blind mind is asking Sanjaya, the introspective, the intuitive faculty. He's saying, what did they? On the field of battle today, what did they? And Master makes the point, that question is asked in the past tense. He does not say, what are they doing? This intuitive faculty is clairvoyant. He can see everything. He sees all the nuances of the battle, what's happening, who's winning, who's doing what. But the blind mind is asking in the past tense, why? Because it's in the battle, there isn't time to introspect. In the battle of life, we just have to do the best we can, which is one reason why, yes, we are going to fall down. There are going to be mistakes. We are going to, in the basketball game of life, we're going to hit the rim, we're going to hit the backboard, we're going to shoot air balls. There's going to be times where we just plain miss the shot. It happens. Afterwards is the time to ask, okay, what could we do differently? How could we improve? What's the next step? And that's the beauty of this example from the Bhagavad Gita is the blind mind gets to learn, okay, this is what happened. Who won today? And we can ask ourselves the same thing at the end of a day. And Swamiji and Master both recommend this in different ways. What did I do today? Who won the battle today? The material forces or the spiritual forces? Because it's easy to get caught up, as Nirmala pointed out. Every billboard, every advertisement, it's all saying, buy me, take me home. I will make you happy. I will thrill you. I will give you pleasure, etc., etc. And okay, some of those things maybe we need, but we don't necessarily need the attachment part of it. And the spiritual forces, meanwhile, are the joy, the bliss, the peace, the calmness, the wisdom to just say, I own it all already on the inside. I already am this entire universe. I've loved the chant that we sometimes sing, Swami Ram Tirtha's chant. And it begins with these words, none can atone me, say, who would injure me? The world turns aside to make room for me. And later on, one of the verses is, I hitch to my chariot the fates and the gods. In the voice of thunder proclaim it abroad. Howl, O ye winds, blow, bugles, blow, free. Liberty, 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 Om. I mean, this is the God's eye view of the universe. And if you think, okay, let's see, this little body is pretty fragile. I know from experience that if you fall off a ladder 8 or 10 feet up in the air and crash into the ground, it's not necessarily going to be a pretty picture, a great outcome. Well, what if your body is as big as the universe? What if this entire space, and that's just the physical universe, what about the astral and the causal? What if your body is as big as all that and even you can't, causal universe. How can you even describe size? How big is a thought? How big is consciousness? There's no size to consciousness. But what if that is your reality? Then you can say those words. Who would injure me? Who's going to harm me? How can I be bothered or annoyed by anything? I am the entire universe. That's the reality we're aiming for. And that's the reality that is our birthright when we dive deep into meditation. And it's a thrilling potential. And it exists for everyone. And yes, we can get guilty. We can feel inadequate. That's a word that comes up often when we teach meditation. Oh, I can't meditate. My mind is restless. You know what? That's why we meditate. Minds are restless. That's what they do. You step behind the mind and you go into peace and inner calmness. That is all of our potential. Every single person. From the most, I remember a guy who came to Ananda years ago. I swear, this guy had been a drummer in a rock band. And so, his body was just twitching. He'd sit for meditation and you'd hear this little thumping because his little toe would be tapping on the ground, thump, 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 thump. There have been some restless people, even for someone like him. Yes, peace, calmness, inner joy, they are all possible. It may take more time, yes, okay, that's possible too, but that potential exists for all of us. Let's claim that potential for our very own.